Okay, let's move to velocity, burn downs, and burn up charts. So velocity, the team's ability to produce work over multiple sprints. What we're looking at here is two simple little graphs, two simple little ways to track velocity. And usually velocity is tracked in terms of story points. Again, story points are the units, the relative units which we measure the complexity of a story by. Now, some teams will, when they get more mature, talk about it in terms of stories. We've had teams that we've worked with before that have gotten so good at sizing their work that they can size all of their work to the same size. So all they do is count story cards. So their velocity was essentially, say, 20 story cards over a sprint. And they were very, very consistent at it, but it takes a long time to get to that. So in the beginning, you want to talk about velocity in terms of how many story points can a team achieve within a sprint, and then how many, and so it helps you to forecast moving forward as to how much work you can get done over multiple sprints. So you look at this simple little, hand-drawn graph on the left-hand side. These are individual sprints, iterations, and sprints used interchangeably. Sprint is the name of an iteration or a time cycle inside of Scrum. And this graph on the left, you see different levels of story points that are finished for each sprint. Each line represents a sprint, and it shows how many story points they got done in those sprints. So you can see over time that there's some variation, but that for the most part, they start to establish a pattern. You can also look at that velocity over time. The simple hand-drawn graph on the right is how many story points have they achieved over a certain time per sprint. And looking at that over different sprint times, you can see how much team velocity over time they've achieved. Now, an easy way to understand velocity is that velocity improves as the team starts to improve utilizing sprints and Scrum and iterative delivery, and as their Agile technique improves, as they become more agile in the way that they operate, and they become more comfortable in this new way of operating, they tend to increase in their velocity to a certain point where they kind of plateau based on the way that they're doing things. And what you'll see, the easiest way to do that is usually you average over a 3-sprint period. You look at an average, a rolling 3 sprints. So it's the most current 3 sprints of activity to see what is your average velocity over that time. And you can use that to forecast forward to say that, hey, if we're achieving 30, 40 story points a sprint, then over 10 sprints, we should be able to achieve somewhere between 30 to 300 to 400, right? Now, the variability on that, you want to, should become pretty consistent. It shouldn't be too variable. The only variations you should really see in there is if you've got team members who are out, you've got folks that are sick, you've got holidays or days off that are planned, or for some reason the team isn't at full capacity. Another reason could be that you're taking on new work, that you need to do some learning, and you need to figure out how to do something. Maybe you're using a new language or a new tool set. You're trying to do something the team's never done before. Those things, whenever there's learning involved, there tends to be a dip in velocity temporarily while the team is leveraging some of their capacity towards actual learning. And then as they get good at that, it tends to come back up again. So let's talk about burn down charts. Burn down charts are a easy way to track how well we're doing within a sprint. It's a way to track our intra-sprint velocity, right? Looking at how well we're moving through the sprint. This is an actual graph from an actual 2010 team that I worked with down in Florida. And this was a very mature team. And the reason I pulled this graph out was to show you that you can do these manually like you saw on the last page. You can do them very, very lightweight, or there are systems that can track it. In this case, this was a very old version, very old now, but it was new at the time, of TFS and Visual Studios. So they were actually tracking things through that. We were actually doing our development and housing our code there and everything else. So we were able to track on the one of the first earlier versions that they had of actually starting to be able to utilize the Scrum framework. So we had 4-week sprints. This team had 4-week sprints over that time. because back then that was a little more common. And it was a sizable team, small then, again, wasn't nearly as small as now. However, they had been together for a very long time and were very effective. So we needed to have those skill sets on the team in order to get done the work that we were doing. Now, the important thing to look at this burn down chart is that you've got 4 different things that you're looking at. Actually 5, one's kind of hidden. But the 4 are the completed items in green, the remaining items to be done in blue. You've got an ideal track, which was at the beginning of this sprint specifically. There were around 400 story points that they had. Again, a longer time period. Usually you won't have that many story points. And their sizing they tended to use some of the bigger cards more often than they did the smaller ones. But it still represented small work to them. We were still delivering in a very iterative way, and we were getting feature functionality out. Now, the key here is that you've got that ideal trend, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to keep your work throughout the sprint as close as you can to the ideal trend so that you know towards the end, as you're moving along, you're working towards hitting your commitment or hitting your goal of getting things done. And then you had the actual line. Now you'll see at the front end of this that our work actually went from about 400 to up to about 500 points of work because there was unknown work or discovery that we needed to do in order to complete the work that we had done. But if you look at the point, once that work goes up, it stays flat across the top. So the hidden data here is that flat line across the top. That actually shows that our product owner at the time didn't add scope. We didn't go in and we didn't add scope. We didn't add things. The numbers didn't go up. You typically see a little bit of a spike at the beginning of a sprint because you're planning iteratively and you're planning just in time with a lot of things. So there is some discovery at the beginning where you may have some new stories come in. And in this case, because you're going over a month, you're going about a month's time here for a sprint, and because you had a larger team, you had more variability. Now, smaller teams, shorter time period, that little bump in the beginning will be less because there will be fewer things to review and get ready for in those sprints. And again, modern day Scrum, you're using smaller teams, you're doing things in a much shorter time period. So all of this tends to get more accurate. But what I wanted to show you this graph is that A, you can generate the data in different ways, but B, this is what a mature team looks like, what a mature team's burn down looks like, regardless of the weeks or how many story points. You can see that the actual line trended very close to the ideal line in terms of the way that we work. Some ups and downs. You have weekends in there. You have different things going on, right? Those little flat bars are the weekends over a 4-week period. So, but you could see towards the end of every week that they were actually at or under the line. So they were very good at forecasting, predicting their work, knowing how much they could take in and bring things in. This is really key. Burn downs help you. So we could this team checked themselves all through this time period and said, are we on track? Are we on track? Are we on track? And they could show the product owner, yep, we're doing very well. We're doing very well. Things are good. We got the unknowns at the beginning. We got those all accounted for, and we're moving down through the work. So that's an example of one type of a burn down chart. A burn up chart is typically used to track a larger feature set delivery over time. Again, you can use these charts in different ways, and different companies do, but when you first start out, a burn down is for the sprint, to look at it and say, this is how we're tracking through the sprint. If a product owner or stakeholders want to look at how are all of the different sprints put together, tracking together to complete my product, like for example, when we were talking about the 2 ways of developing a car. How far are we along on developing that car? How close are we to getting those things done? So in this case, they were actually tracking on this example. You can see story points on the left, but they were tracking in this example development activity. They were tracking QA activity, which today you're going to see when we get to our development and testing section. Those 2 things are much more integrated than they used to be, which is a good thing. That's, again, growth in Agile itself and Scrum. And then you've got completed work tracking as well. And you can see that dev is a little bit ahead of QA, which is a little bit ahead of complete. It's kind of good to track this because you can see where different things are going on. Now, this team found this to be valuable. Sometimes you don't have to have this granularity. Sometimes it's about completed work, because you could draw a trend line across here, just like you did for the burn down, and you could see how well are we doing. If we want to get this product done by the 11th of October of 2010 on this graph, Are we tracking well enough to do that? And in this case, if you were to draw those trend lines, yes, you would be done before that due date, which was the date that they had set out to complete their material by. Now, in the beginning, you could see that it was kind of a little jumbly again, but that it started to level out. And you could see this pattern of consistent activity going across here. Again, just like we said in relative sizing, consistency is absolutely critical to predictability. And when you're working in this fast-paced environment, when you're working in an iterative way on smaller chunks of work, you're trying to learn and take in data as you go. These things are really important because you could see on the top of this one, the gray line is the actual scope. So when they started out, they only had 55 points of scope, but they ended up having 80 by the time they're moving. So they started adding scope to this thing, and they're still on track to probably finish it. Now, that may have been by plan or design, but you have to be cognizant of tracking scope as well as the work being done, because getting to your commitment also means, is the product owner and the stakeholders, are they committing to a certain amount of scope, or are they going to keep changing the scope on us and keep trying to hold the date the same, which is a little bit of the iron triangle in effect. So burn up charts are really good for tracking multiple sprints, how we're tracking on a product with maybe multiple projects moving through the system, and how well that's going towards our expected delivery date. And is everybody, including product owner and stakeholders, are they holding true to what they committed to, or is there scope creep, in this case, scope increasing throughout the project or the product's project lifestyle cycle, or are things holding still? So there's this concept, you've probably heard of it before, called yesterday's weather. These graphs are good because, and the data is good because this concept of yesterday's weather is the idea that yesterday's measures are the best indicators for today and tomorrow's results, not too far in the future. In the past, we were able to forecast out farther and be a little less, have a little less variability in those forecasts and be a lot more accurate, because change didn't happen as fast as it does today. Obviously, we're living in an insane amount of change right now, and things are changing daily. You get on the radio and you listen to what's going on, or on the internet, and you look at what's going on, and what is planned, what we thought would happen next week has completely changed. So we're constantly looking at this stuff. This is the way the world's been trending. This is a giant spike in this craziness of change in terms of the amount per time period we're talking about. But this whole idea is about tracking things as to how well we're doing. And if you go too far out, the likelihood that you're going to be wrong increases greatly. So this concept of having a longer term goal, say that car way out there, but doing this iteratively and looking at different parts along the way, because what you may come out with at the end may be something different that you need than what you thought you needed when you started way before. So yesterday's weather is this concept that we're using. The idea of burn ups, burn downs, velocity is all around that mindset around saying, what we've done so far over the recent short period in terms of velocity, looking like an average to the last three, is really the best indicator as to what we're probably going to be able to do for the next 1, 2, or 3 out. Now, the next 5 out, the next 10 out, I don't know. And frankly, I'm not that concerned about it yet because so much is going to change between now and then. What I'm concerned about is being really, really, really accurate the next couple of sprints, and then continuing to reinvest and research and review, discuss and adapt all of what we learned as we're going through that, and then apply that moving forward, which we'll get a lot into that when we get into the lean section as well.